Hello everyone. Today we will be talking about mental workload assessment. Last class we tried to understand the physical workload assessment. So, this time we are talking about mental workload assessment, because when we are talking about ergonomic workplace analysis or evaluation, definitely physical and mental both types of demand or workload assessment is important. Based on the results of these two variables like mental workload and physical workload, we need to take decision that how we are going to changes those variables which is impacting on this workload. So, let us first understand what is mental workload, and then slowly I will take you to like what are the varieties of tools and techniques available to evaluate them or assess them. So, what it is? If you talk about mental workload in normal terminology or common understanding, it is mostly kind of models of information processing. Okay. So, when we are talking about like passing on one information, and do you remember that how the ergonomic work system or ergo system exists? It exists between like, major three components are one man, machine and environment. So, interaction happens. So, information passes from each like man to machine or machine to man, and how these information processing is happening in case of human being. So, that we will be talking about in terms of mental workloads. So, it is a very old concept. It is not that we are talking about this type of mental workload assessment recently. It is a very old concept. So, Welford in 1968 he explained it through a model, and he highlighted that humans are able to process a limited amount of information. So, human being has some capacity or capability. We also discussed about this capacity in earlier presentation. So, he said that human being has a limitation to process this type of information, and performance declines. Okay. So, we are always talking about performance, productivity and all those things. So, he mentioned that performance declines if the task demand exceeds the capacity. Okay. So, the same concept what we are trying to follow in ergonomics, that balancing or optimizing the capacity or capability with the job demand. Okay. So, the same thing this concept sustained for physical as well as mental. Last time when we discussed about physical workload assessment and how this has an impact in the ergonomic workplace assessment, it was very clear that if there is a job demand, suppose load lifting or load carrying, if your muscles are not having that much capacity, then definitely your performance will reduce. So, what you need to do? You need to understand the capacity or capability of those group of muscles before you decide that this much load is suitable or this much load can be carried or pushed or pulled or anything else, right. So, same theory sustained for your mental workload. So, when he mentioned that when it increases, the demand increases or it is more than the capacity, definitely the total performance of the group of worker or the single individual worker will reduce or will decline. However, the concept of limited capacity was not thoroughly understood in earlier works, like those days. Now, slowly we are having different varieties of model to describe or elaborate this limited capacity. Later in many models we have which explains all these aspects. Now, this is like a very commonly used model. So, it is developed in 1999 by Wickens and Holland. So, the whole model name is human information processing model. So, how this particular model actually works? So, here two major component is long term memory and working memory. So, it has always two ways of information change. So, whenever we are working, we think what happened earlier and we take decision. Again what is happening here, now it goes back and state for long term memory. So, this way it has a both way communication. Now, here one important component of this model is attentional resources. Okay. So, this has lot of influence in sensory perception. You have influence here response selection. Now, when we are talking about response selection try to say for how I am going to receive or perceive that particular response, either between man to man or machine and man. Okay. So, how I am receiving that and how I am again responding to that. So, response selection and response execution. So, when you receive some information, how you are executing that, and it has a very closed loop. Okay. So, it's a continuous process, it does not stop. So, if a particular cycle of your job or task over, then this loop gets break, otherwise it keeps on continuing. So, this is very important when we are talking about human performance modeling, right. So, this is the basic model. Based on that we have several other models which also try to explain how these informations are getting processed. So, when we are talking about job capacity or capability of a particular person and the kind of demand we have, if we try to analyze that job demand and the capacity of a particular person through this particular model, we will come to know where the problem is, how and where the problem is. So, first we understand where the problem is, then we try to understand how, and then we try to answer how we can answer that particular how. So, if we can clear that what is the root cause of that particular issue or problem, maybe it is a communication, maybe some information, maybe some resources, maybe the lack of capacity to understand that, maybe coding, maybe the whole structure of the instrument, maybe the kind of panel is being designed for that instrument, many other things. So, once we understand that, then only our role being an ergonomist will come into picture, that how we can reduce that or minimize that or we can eliminate that. Once we do that, probably what we will do, we will enhance the performance of that particular person, of course, which will improve the productivity of the whole system, and that is the aim of an ergonomist. So, that we try to do. Now, let us understand the psychological process what happens when we are talking about mental load. So, it is again a very new model, it is developed in 2013. So, here three major parameter or variable we are considering. One is resource allocation. Okay. One is resource allocation. So, it stands in this particular left axis. Other is performance. Okay. So, whenever we are talking about ergonomic evaluation, finally we are going to check with the existing system or with the existing situation or ergo system, how my performance is. My means the worker's performance or operator's performance, right. So, the next variable is performance. This is again in the y axis, right, and then here we are talking about resources demand by the primary task. Now, I will be talking later in the about what is primary task and secondary task. So, in this model we are talking about the primary task. Now, you can see when we are in this particular zone, our resource allocation is going on this direction, we have a storage over here, right. So, we have spare capacity. So, given a chance or given a consideration where we have more capacity, but job demand is less, then definitely we will reach somewhere in the maximum level where we will feel good, like our performance will be increasing, right. So, it will be increasing. Now, of course, in a particular system there will be some limitation of the resources. So, maybe if we are drawing this particular line, that is the maximum available resources, once it is done, resources means not only physical component, many other things. So, once we restrict that, if still the performance or the primary task demand increases, then we may have scarcity over here, right. So, here we have spare amount of capacity, so we can improve our performance, but here we may have a difficulty. So, this particular model is in ideal condition. So, we are talking about how these all variables interact with each other. Now, let us see what actually happens. Okay. So, if you see here, all are not going properly. So, in this previous slide you have seen that maximum available resources is on the straight line, but in actual condition, like where it is in practical situation, so it happens like this. Maybe this is not only the actual nature, maybe little more different. So, you have varieties, variables are same, resource allocated, primary task demand and the performance, that will be there, but the variables will behave in different way. So, you have to really understand that how it is happening. Again, it is being tested by him, how the poor performance can be justified or can be evaluated. Now, when we are talking about mental workload, we should understand when and where we should do and how we are going to apply mental workload assessment process, and we can use those data for our evaluation purpose and redesigning of the thing. So, mainly in actually this mental workload assessment, it started in the aviation industry and it continued for military operation, driving, control room operation, etc. Further, I would like to mention that mental workload assessment or measurement is used throughout the design life cycle. Okay. So, now suppose you are designing a product or designing a particular service, you really want to understand while using that product or while using or interacting with those product and services, how the operator, how the responses are coming and how the mental performance is happening. So, throughout your product development life cycle, this particular assessment process is very important. Also, it is used to understand the whatever the existing systems are, to understand those we need to do workload assessment. Now, when we are talking about workload assessment, we should know what are the varieties of measurements available. Okay, major 3 types of measurement processes are there, but it is not very specific, so that I should do the first one or second one or third one, because depending on my objective of research or understanding, I can combine any one of them or 2 of them or 3 of them, or I can use a single one as well. So, again I am repeating the same concept. What I am trying to explain you from the first day of my lecture is, always you should select a tool, method or guideline based on your requirement, your context, your research objective, your hypothesis. Okay. So, based on that you can select. So, I will be describing all these 3 in detail. Now, when we are talking about types, so let us understand what is primary task performance, or task measure, and then what is secondary task performance or measure. So, what it says that of the particular operator involves the measurement of operator's ability to perform the primary task under analysis. So, maybe in a particular job we have varieties of operation or varieties of tasks, right, but for that particular job which one is the primary task. So, we need to understand that. So, once we do lot of other analysis like hierarchical task analysis or through physical understanding observation, we will definitely will be able to define for a particular job which one is primary task and which one is the secondary task. So, concern is for primary task what is the ability. If you try to understand that, that will be the primary task performance measurement. Of course, the secondary will be like measurement of operator's ability to perform an additional secondary task in addition to primary task, includes memory recall task, mental arithmetic task, reaction time measurement, training task, all those things. So, these are also very important. Also, we should know physiological measure of mental workload, we can in short form we can call MWL. What it says, when we are talking about mental workload, definitely it has an impact on your physiological responses, especially your heart rate variability, eye movement, brain activity, etc. You may not feel directly, but it has lot of impact. Suppose you are in a very demanding job, mentally demanding job you are doing and you have less time to complete it, definitely your heart rate will go high. Okay. Or maybe your EEG pattern will be very different as compared to resting condition. So, you really need to understand, or through measurement or assessment you can definitely define the kind of workload we have, mental workload we have in that particular situation. The other thing is, as we are talking about subjective response, so like mental workload, it is very much of your subjective response dependent situation, because here adaptation, likeliness, my own understanding, my perception, it affects the responses of the subjective rating. So, that also affect the kind of workload I have. Okay. So, if suppose I need to do a particular job what is not of my choice, maybe kind of mental workload I will get imposed on will be very high as compared to the other person or second person who is really happy to do the job. Okay. So, taking subjective response and understanding that understanding the pattern of response is very important when we are talking about mental workload. What is important over here to understand the kind of dimensions we get in the subjective responses. We have mainly two variety, one is unidimensional, another is multidimensional. Depending on the requirement, you will choose what type of tool or techniques you are going to use for your research. So, there are varieties of tool, some of them are unidimensional, some of them are multidimensional. So, based on your requirement you can choose. Also, context validity you need to understand, and then you can pick one of them to use further. Now, when we are talking about mental workload assessment tool, we need to understand what are the varieties of feature it should have. Okay. Because without these features maybe your result will not be showing the actual situation, or your prediction may be somewhere wrong or diverted or diversified from the actual situation. So, you should understand the sensitivity, you should understand the limited intrusiveness, you should understand the diagnostic capacity of this particular tool, also global sensitivity, transferability, ease of implementation. These all are the features should be looked into before you choose a particular tool or technique for assessing the mental workload. So, you should understand based on your requirement you may choose any one of them. So, everywhere all these features are not equally distributed, somewhere it is high, somewhere it is low. So, based on your type of research, your research design, you need to choose any one of them. Now, let us understand what is primary task measurement or task performance measurement. So, it is a method mainly we follow is the performance measure. So, you are actually measuring the performance. It is very generic in nature. It requires very low training and the kind of time or kind of duration you should spend for this particular tool is very low. But yes, it is a valid study. So, you can use it. It needs very small limited amount of infrastructure, that is only a simulator or laptop. So, what is the advantage? Advantage is it direct index of performance. Okay. So, it gives exactly a particular index. So, effective for lengthy tasks. So, suppose a task is long enough for 2 hours or maybe 50 minutes. Okay. For those type of tasks we can use it. Easily can be conjunction with another method, like you can use primary task performance measurement as well as a subjective rating. Okay. Then you can have a better understanding how it in actual. But it has some disadvantage as well, because it may not always distinguish between the levels of workload. So, very specific levels are not possible to determine, not reliable when it used in isolation. So, suppose only this as a tool if you are using and trying to say okay, this is the level or mental workload is this much, then maybe you are not you will not get the success. Okay. So, probably it should be used in conjunction with the other relevant tool. Similarly, we have secondary task performance, because again it is a performance measurement as similar as the primary task measurement. The required time, tools, validation are also same. Here the advantage is it is sensitive to workload variation, because when you are talking about primary tasks and secondary tasks. So, what are the varieties available for your secondary task, you can easily come to know and you get a very quick review of this particular tool. But sensitivity as a whole is low. So, you should be very careful to use this as a single individual tool. Now, physiological measure, it is again a performance measurement tool and it is generic, but yes, while you are using this type of instrument or technique to measure, you really need a high amount of training. So, you should understand sensor, you should understand positioning, you should understand which context you are using, all the details scientific knowledge you should have before you start collecting data for this type of technique. So, mainly heart rate monitor, eye tracking, then EEG is being used for physiological measurement. So, as far as the advantage and disadvantage is concerned, it is very much sensitive and task variation, like if you have very minute deviation from one task to another task, you will get a difference in the result. So, it is very much sensitive, data recorded continuously, so very important. So, you will get a full data set. Also, you can use it in real time situation. Okay. So, maybe somebody is working in the shop floor, if you want to use it, you can put those gadgets and instruments and you will get a continuous recording of it based on the provisions, like we have some instrument which is telemetry in nature. So, you can continuously get the data without affecting the normal process or the movement of the workers. So, it is possible. But as far as the disadvantage is concerned, it may have some influencing external influencing factor which is very difficult to interpret many times. These particular instruments are very costly sometimes, physically obtrusive, difficult to use. You need to have lot of training before utilize or use these particular types of instruments. So, you should be very careful when you are choosing as a variable the physical measures to understand the mental workload. Very commonly widely used tools are subjective rating tools. There are so many numbers, I will explain few of them. Let us first explain about the NASA TLX. TLX stands for Task Load Index. It is very useful tool as far as this subjective rating of mental workload is concerned. Here this particular tool is multidimensional subjective rating. It does that. Training is very simple, so you really do not need to do much of training. Time requirement is very less, and being a subjective rating scale, it needs simple pen and paper. So, it is quick, easy to use, little training cost, better consistency, and can be applied in any domain. So, its validity is very high. Now, still we have some disadvantage, more complex to analyze the unidimensional tool. Because as it is a multidimensional, you have varieties of vectors. So, you really need to put lot of attention over there, because if it is unidimensional, then it is very too easy, far easy, but here it is a problem. TLX weighing procedure is laborious, because once you collecting data is not much problem, but when you try to interpret it, it needs little bit of more concentration, more labor. For individual workload, only this particular tool can be used. If it is a group work, you may not use it properly. Now, one more tool, that is the modified Cooper-Harper scale, the same kind of tool, but the difference is here it is unidimensional subjective rating scale. Being a subjective rating scale, again pen and paper we are going to use. Similar to NASA TLX, it needs very little cost, widely used in number of domain, easier to analyze than multidimensional data. So, very important, but we have some disadvantage as well. What it is? These are unsophisticated measure of workload, limited manual control tasks, not sensitive to it's not that sensitive as the NASA TLX and SWOT analysis. I will tell about SWOT later. Now, let us take example of subjective workload assessment technique, that is SWOT. So, what it is again, it is a multidimensional as the NASA TLX. Mainly it is being used in the aviation industry. It is a very, although it is a generic, but still same pen and paper, it is quick, easy to use, little training cost, multidimensional subscale are generic, allowing widespread of use. So, definitely you can use these for your own mental workload assessment. So, NASA TLX, SWOT, these comes under similar, these are multidimensional, and you can get varieties of orientation, direction to understand where the intervention can be. So, very important. Another one same as the previous, that is the subjective workload domains. So, all these tools you can definitely go into detail, because each components is not possible within this stipulated time period. I am just naming them. So, you can take your own time to read them in detail, how to use it, what are the variables are available, which one is important where. So, all these things you can study yourself, and if you have any query, you definitely can come back. Now, one more tool, that is the Defense Research Agency workload scale. It is mainly used in the aviation industry, and as similar the previous scales, it is quick, easy to use and little training cost. We have Malvern capacity estimate. So, again the difference is here it is unidimensional. Previously this tool was multidimensional, SWOT also multidimensional, but this is unidimensional tool. So, here validation study has not been done. So, based on your context, your requirement, you can do a pilot and you can validate is it useful for you or is it validate for you or not. So, that you can do definitely before using this tool. We have Bedford scale, again it is a subjective rating scale. Now, what I will try to explain over here, that with an example how we are going to use one tool. So, this particular tool what we call is SWAT is developed in 1988 for US Air Force to assess the pilot workload in cockpit environment. Okay. So, how much the mental workload exists when a person or pilot is sitting in the airplane cockpit. So, it also been used in the proactive manner, like without any report also we can use and we can find out, especially in the product development phase. So, what it says that along with NASA TLX, it is one of the most commonly used method. Okay. So, SWOT measures 3 dimensions of the operator of MWL: time load, mental load, stress load. So, these are the variables that it measures. Now, here we have the details how time load, mental load and stress load can be measured in 3 scores. So, based on the intensity of the score, we will be deciding how we can do the changes in the whole work pattern or instrument use or the manpower recruitment, like rotation and all those things. So, this is the this is just an example. You can create your own example with your existing situation or whatever is your research area or your interest area, you can create that. If you are developing any product, you can create for that as well, and you can share it to share back with us, and then we can find where the problem is and how we can take it further. Now, this NASA TLX, again we are going to take an example. It is again developed in 1988 by Hart and Steveland. So, here we try to score the in a particular interval scale which starts from low, ends at high, and low means 1, high means 20. So, we try to score them at an individual rating, and we then again we will analyze it for our convenience. So, from NASA TLX we have mental demand, physical demand, temporal demand, effort, performance and frustration level. So, we have 6 variables to measure. In SWOT we had 3 variables, we had time, mental effort and stress load, but in NASA TLX we have total 6 dimension: mental demand, physical demand, temporal demand, effort, performance and frustration level. So, all these dimensions can be understood or can be clarified or evaluated or assessed through NASA TLX. So, based on the research question you are going to answer, you can choose any one of them, not only these 2, any other 4, 5 whatever I discussed earlier. So, only here I describe these 2 specific tool, because these 2 tools are very commonly used. Okay. So, the popularity is very high for these 2 tools. Now, when we are talking about mental workload and all those things, it is very important to understand a particular kind of framework we should follow. So, it is developed in 2005 by Megon. So, what it is saying that we have a list of task factors. So, demand, what is job demand or task demand, what is the intensity of the difficulty, what are the varieties of constraint we have, what is the competing task we have, and what are the modalities we can do the task. So, this can be defined in a particular group which we will be calling as task factor. Further, we have operator responses where workload and strain will be there, and based on the operator responses we will be calculating the operator's performance. Mainly we will be doing the primary task performance measurement. So, here all are interconnected, where we have an influencing factor, that is the environmental and organizational. Okay. So, how the relations are, how the physical environment is, all these things are influential factor. So, you should understand this particular, you can really follow this particular diagram or schematic representation of the mental workload, how the stressors are interacting. So, you can explain from this the what is the current situation of your area or of your the kind of research or kind of ergonomic workstation you are trying to evaluate. So, that is possible. So, here I would like to refer these two books. Again, I think this particular book I am referring many times, because this here you will get lot of basic fundamentals. So, for this today's lecture, if you follow these two books, probably you will get know in detail more elaboration. So, please read them. If you have any query, again the same thing what I am going to say is, come back, let us know where exactly you got stuck. So, we are here and we will definitely answer them. Thank you.